Nancy Dillard Lyon was born on August 6, 1963, in Dallas, Texas. She was the youngest of 4 children, alongside 2 older brothers and 1 sister. Her father had established a prosperous career in commercial real estate, leaving the family financially comfortable. They resided in one of Dallas's most exclusive neighborhoods, participated actively in charitable work, and commanded considerable respect within the community. As a child, Nancy was reserved and rather shy, yet she was an outstanding student with ambitious goals for her future. Upon completing high school, she enrolled at Hollins College in Roanoke, Virginia, earning a liberal arts degree in 1975. She eventually decided to focus on landscape architecture, studying for 2 years at the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Fine Arts, then continuing to the Harvard Graduate School of Design, where she finished the program in 1981. In her first year at Harvard, Nancy encountered a man named Richard, and they soon started dating. Following graduation, they married and returned to Dallas, making their home near the same affluent neighborhood where Nancy's parents resided. Nancy joined one of the nation's largest construction firms at the time, quickly advancing through its ranks. She developed a reputation as a gifted leader and ultimately became the youngest partner in the company's history. 5 years after marrying, Nancy and Richard had their first daughter, then welcomed another 2 years afterward. At 37, Nancy had created a thriving career and a family of her own. It appeared she possessed everything she might have wished for, or at least that was the picture presented to outsiders. Then one day, everything changed. On the evening of January 8, 1991, Nancy was suddenly struck by a very severe and unexpected illness. Intense and increasingly painful stomach cramps plagued her, and her overall health continued steadily declining. Richard called her physician, who thought she had food poisoning and prescribed medication. He immediately visited the pharmacy, returned home with the medication, and gave it to Nancy. Yet the treatment brought absolutely no relief. Richard eventually drove her directly to the hospital, where doctors admitted her for further medical examinations and testing. A battery of medical tests was performed, but none provided an explanation for her condition, while Nancy's already fragile health worsened with every passing hour. Her breathing turned increasingly irregular, her blood pressure fell to dangerously low levels, and by the following morning, several of her organs had already started shutting down. At that stage, doctors suspected Nancy could have been exposed to some form of poison, prompting them to order still more tests. But her health was declining so rapidly that they could not identify the underlying cause soon enough. Multiple vital organs failed, she could no longer breathe without assistance, and she eventually fell into a deep coma. Doctors kept making every possible effort to save her, yet it soon became painfully obvious that recovery was no longer possible. Her family was informed that they would have to make the deeply painful and difficult choice to take her off life support. 6 days after entering the hospital, Nancy died. Since doctors could not establish what had caused her death, her body was sent to the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office for an autopsy. However, that was not the only important reason for the autopsy. By then, investigators were seriously and carefully weighing the possibility that Nancy had been intentionally poisoned. While she was still conscious, Nancy had personally told one of her doctors that she suspected someone could be deliberately poisoning her. Nancy said the strange events had started roughly 4 months earlier, after she discovered a bottle of costly wine and an unsigned card on her front porch. Believing the package had come from her neighbors, she poured herself a glass and drank several small sips. The wine tasted awful, leading her to assume it had spoiled. That evening, she developed intense stomach pain. At that moment, however, she never considered that someone might have attempted to poison her. In retrospect, Nancy recalled that something about the bottle had appeared strange. It seemed possible that it had already been opened. Her symptoms eventually disappeared completely, but soon afterward, 2 events caused Nancy to question whether someone was intentionally making her ill and whether her own husband could be responsible. In 1989, years before Nancy died, she discovered Richard was involved in an affair. Bank statements showed that he had spent substantial amounts of money on presents for another woman and on trips they had taken together. Richard first denied the allegations, but later confessed to the affair. He and Nancy chose to attempt saving their marriage for their daughters, and Richard promised that he had ended the relationship. Roughly a year later, though, Nancy discovered Richard had spent several days away with that very same woman, and she then decided their marriage had ended. She ordered Richard to leave and hired an attorney named Mary to discuss the details of a divorce. Nancy also limited Richard's access to their shared accounts because he continued spending considerable sums on his mistress. Nancy made significantly more money than Richard did, making her the family's primary source of income. Without access to their shared funds, he could not have sustained that level of spending on his own salary alone at all. In September 1990, Nancy personally informed Richard that she had finally and firmly decided to proceed with the divorce. At first, he calmly accepted her decision, but during the following several weeks, they started talking about whether they should make one final serious effort to preserve their marriage for the sake of their children and family. They entered marriage counseling and slowly started spending considerably more time together. Nancy and Richard went out together on dates and even traveled outside the state with their daughters to visit relatives. By the end of 1990, Richard had returned to Nancy's house, and ultimately, the couple chose not to go through with the divorce. They withdrew the documents in early January, just days before Nancy entered the hospital. By that point, though, Nancy had already started seriously wondering if Richard was attempting to poison her. She was not convinced and desperately wanted to believe her husband was incapable of such a thing, yet one particularly troubling and unsettling incident had caused her to entertain the idea. It occurred after Nancy discovered the wine bottle on her porch. Several weeks afterward, she and Richard went on a date as part of their continued and mutual attempt to mend the marriage. They ate at a restaurant and afterward saw a movie. Inside the theater, Richard handed Nancy a cup of soda, but immediately after taking a sip, she detected an unusual flavor. Looking into the cup, she noticed what seemed to be some sort of white powder floating in her beverage. Nancy showed it to Richard, but he claimed there was nothing wrong and repeatedly urged her to continue drinking. When she refused, he grew visibly upset. Later that evening, Nancy became severely ill yet again. For the first time, she genuinely questioned whether Richard had placed something harmful into her drink. Once Richard returned to the house, Nancy continued suffering similar episodes, and gradually they began occurring with increasing frequency. She visited several physicians and underwent many tests, but nobody could identify the cause of her symptoms. Around that same period, Richard started giving her what he called vitamins, insisting they would improve her overall health and recovery. Nancy, though, never saw the bottle or package from which the capsules had originated. On another separate evening, while Nancy was already feeling sick, Richard brought her a beverage beside her bed. She drank several sips, and during the night, she became violently ill once more. Mary urged her to bring the wine bottle and vitamin capsules so they could be sent to a laboratory for careful laboratory testing, but Nancy remained deeply hesitant. She explained to Mary that she did not want to accuse her husband of poisoning her, especially without any solid evidence. A scandal of that nature would have brought profound embarrassment upon her family, and Nancy had grown up believing that preserving the family's reputation was extremely important to her. Even so, she had retained both the wine bottle and capsules, and she told Mary exactly where she had kept them. Once Mary learned Nancy had been hospitalized and doctors were unable to explain her condition, she immediately phoned Nancy's father and told him everything. Nancy remained alive at that point. Her father immediately went to the hospital and asked physicians to test her for poison. He also gave them the wine bottle and capsules, which they sent to a laboratory for further analysis. By then, doctors had already submitted blood samples from Nancy for toxicology analysis because she had given them the same account she had earlier shared with her attorney. However, tests of this kind required considerable time, while Nancy's health was declining much too rapidly, so none of the results returned before Nancy ultimately died. Following Nancy's death, police received 2 separate reports concerning the suspected poisoning from different sources. Her family made the first one after learning what she had told her attorney. The second report came from the doctor Nancy had spoken with about her fears of poisoning only hours before she fell into a coma. After conducting an autopsy, the medical examiner could find no natural explanation for Nancy's organs shutting down so suddenly. From everything he could determine, she had not been dealing with any disease or health condition capable of accounting for her death. Therefore, he would need to await the toxicology findings before learning anything further about her condition. Meanwhile, specialists analyzed the wine bottle and vitamin capsules Nancy's family had taken to the hospital. The wine contained no poison, yet the capsules presented an entirely different picture. 2 capsules contained barium carbonate, a poisonous chemical utilized for industrial purposes and never intended for human consumption. That substance could have accounted for Nancy's symptoms, but when her toxicology results arrived, they pointed to something completely different from the capsules. The poison inside her body was arsenic rather than barium carbonate. Its level in her blood was several times higher than normal, and the medical examiner determined that arsenic poisoning had injured her organs and ultimately brought about her death. Investigators were therefore left facing a confusing and puzzling circumstance. Nancy had almost certainly been poisoned, yet seemingly not by the same toxic substance discovered in the capsules she had been taking. After receiving the findings, investigators started working to establish when and how Nancy had received the lethal quantity of arsenic. For nearly 4 months before her death, Nancy had repeatedly fallen ill without explanation, including several especially serious episodes, causing investigators to suspect that someone could have been poisoning her over and over during that entire period. To determine whether this theory was accurate, they asked a chemistry professor to inspect strands of Nancy's hair for any evidence of arsenic. The principle behind the examination was fairly straightforward and simple. Hair extends outward from its root, meaning the farther a portion sat from Nancy's scalp, the earlier stage of her life that particular section represented. Since arsenic traces could remain preserved in hair, the professor could approximately determine when the poison had entered her body during that period. Ultimately, he found evidence of at least 3 separate and distinct exposures. The first had taken place around 2 months before Nancy's death, while the latest, which produced the greatest concentration of arsenic in her hair, seemed to have occurred approximately 2 weeks before she died. Even that last dose could not kill her immediately, however, and during the days that followed, the poison slowly and steadily harmed her internal organs until they started failing. By the time every one of these examinations was finished, several weeks had passed since Nancy's death. Given what Nancy had disclosed to her doctor and attorney, almost everyone who knew her closely believed that Richard was responsible for killing her. Police, however, deliberately avoided naming him publicly as a suspect and instructed Nancy's family to keep him completely unaware that investigators were actively looking into him. Detectives waited until roughly a month and a half after Nancy's death before questioning Richard. To their surprise, they discovered he had recently come home from a Mexican vacation with his mistress, a trip they had taken shortly after Nancy's funeral. Richard was summoned to the police station, but initially, investigators withheld the fact that Nancy's death had been connected to poisoning. At that stage, toxicology results had remained confidential even from most of Nancy's relatives, so detectives started out by asking broader questions. They asked Richard if there were chemicals in or around the house that could have exposed Nancy to harm. He mentioned ant and weed killers kept in the garage, while insisting that none of them posed a danger to people. As the questioning continued, though, Richard abruptly recalled ordering several chemicals the previous summer, including arsenic and cyanide. He said he had bought them to eliminate a stubborn and persistent colony of fire ants in the yard. Richard maintained that he had not used all of those chemicals and eventually discarded the remaining chemicals. Afterward, detectives requested permission to search Richard's house and car without obtaining a warrant, and Richard readily agreed to the search. They discovered no arsenic or other potent poisons, except for a fairly mild ant control product that posed relatively little danger. Investigators also interviewed neighbors, who confirmed that the property genuinely had a significant fire ant infestation in the backyard. Nevertheless, the detectives grew even more suspicious of Richard and started examining his financial records in considerably greater detail. They learned that he had made at least 3 purchases from a chemical supply company. In January 1990, roughly a year before Nancy died, he bought lithium hydroxide. Later, in August, he purchased a lengthy assortment of different chemicals, including the same barium carbonate eventually discovered in the capsules Nancy had been taking. Finally, in late November, Richard bought substantial quantities of several arsenic compounds and spent nearly $300 on them altogether. Several packages had been shipped to his workplace. The August delivery, however, went to the apartment Richard occupied after leaving Nancy's house, while the couple was preparing to divorce. Detectives visited the building and interviewed one of Richard's neighbors. The man explained that Richard had asked him to receive several deliveries because he would be away when they arrived. The neighbor did not know what the packages contained, although he recalled seeing hazardous chemical warnings on the box. Investigators next obtained the landlord's permission to search the apartment Richard had rented previously. Inside, they discovered a bag containing empty capsules that could be opened and filled manually, as well as a bottle of vitamins. Everything appeared highly damaging and potentially incriminating for Richard. Yet investigators still lacked sufficient evidence to arrest him. Consequently, they eventually chose to reveal the investigation publicly, hoping someone would provide useful additional information about the case. In mid-March, approximately 3 months after Nancy's death, police conducted a press conference and announced they were handling the case as a homicide. They also openly named Richard as a possible suspect. The investigation instantly became a major national news story. The development only intensified public curiosity surrounding Nancy's mysterious death nationwide. Nancy belonged to a wealthy, prominent Dallas family, and the possibility that a successful woman had been poisoned inside her own house, perhaps by her husband, quickly attracted widespread public interest across the country. The following day, Richard and his attorney organized a press conference themselves. Richard rejected any involvement in his wife's death and continued claiming that he had bought the chemicals exclusively to handle insects. He also presented several other theories about what could have happened, with each explanation creating another troubling series of questions for investigators. First, Richard said Nancy had been scheduled to testify in a case involving one of her former bosses, who was accused of stealing a substantial amount of money. Once Nancy's participation became public, she and a co-worker received anonymous letters telling them to stay away from the case. The co-worker later told detectives that Nancy had been extremely nervous about testifying and profoundly disturbed by the threats. Investigators examined this possibility and interviewed Nancy's former boss. He denied making the threats and said he had not even been aware that the letters existed. He further noted that the lawsuit had ultimately ended through an agreement between the two sides, meaning he would have had no motive to kill any witnesses. That did not entirely eliminate him as a possibility, but detectives found nothing connecting him to Nancy's death. Richard's second theory was even more bizarre and difficult to explain. Richard proposed that Nancy could have been ingesting tiny quantities of arsenic herself to become ill, hoping to win his sympathy and persuade him to come back to their marriage. In Richard's view, she might have unintentionally consumed an excessive amount. According to him, this was supposedly an attempt to manipulate the situation rather than an effort to harm anyone else. He also suggested that the overdose could have happened without her intending to take enough arsenic to cause serious consequences. This explanation, however, did little to resolve the questions surrounding Nancy's illness, the suspicious evidence, or the circumstances surrounding her death. Richard then offered another possibility. Nancy's older brother, Bill, could have caused her death. He said Nancy had previously told him about a deeply inappropriate act Bill had committed against her years earlier. To support that claim, he handed police a group of notes Nancy had written following therapy sessions. The pages resembled a private diary, and detectives soon saw that numerous entries centered on Bill. In those writings, Nancy said Bill had subjected her to awful experiences for years, and that she remained frightened he could harm her to stop her from revealing what had happened. She further noted that his drinking and hostile conduct had become increasingly severe, making her concerned for both herself and her daughters. Nancy also claimed Bill resented her successful career and owed her nearly $90 that he had borrowed from her over the years. Detectives interviewed Nancy's parents, who surprisingly acknowledged that an inappropriate incident had taken place between Nancy and Bill many years before. However, they maintained that it was nowhere near as serious as Nancy had portrayed it in her notes. Bill rejected the allegations entirely and called Nancy's story utterly untrue, forcing detectives to determine whether anything could authenticate her written claims. While the investigation continued, police then received an anonymous letter from a person claiming to work as a hired killer. The author alleged Bill had paid him to murder Nancy, but when Bill failed to provide the promised payment, he chose to reveal everything to police. Detectives attempted to identify the sender, but the letter contained no information that could point them toward its author. Because it had been typed, investigators had no handwriting available for examination, and the leads soon disappeared. Investigators subsequently sent Nancy's notes to a handwriting specialist to establish who had written the sections concerning Bill. Initially, The expert determined that every entry seemed to be in the same handwriting, including numerous pages unrelated to Nancy's brother. However, after comparing those writings with samples from Nancy and Richard, he noticed something unusual. Their handwriting looked nearly identical. Nancy's family said this similarity was intentional rather than accidental. While attending college, the pair had purposely taught themselves to write similarly because Nancy occasionally completed important assignments for Richard, and they did not want anyone discovering that another person had written them. By examining individual letters more carefully, the expert detected several subtle but consistent distinctions that enabled him to separate Nancy's handwriting from Richard's. He determined Nancy had written most of the notes, while Richard had inserted every section concerning Bill. That discovery supplied prosecutors with what they considered the final evidence required, and 5 months after Nancy's death, Richard was arrested. Prosecutors alleged that he intentionally poisoned his wife with multiple chemicals while attempting to make her death appear to have resulted from an unexplained illness. Instead of administering one instantly deadly dose, he allegedly exposed her to smaller quantities over several months, producing a pattern of unexplained medical problems and causing those around her to believe she was seriously sick. As for the motive, prosecutors thought it was something tragically common in cases like this: money. Prosecutors argued that Richard's scheme ultimately revolved around money. Nancy made considerably more than he did, whereas his own finances were already in serious trouble. A divorce would cost him the comfortable lifestyle her earnings had supplied, and probably leave him responsible for child support for their 2 daughters. Meanwhile, Richard apparently hoped to leave Nancy and build a new life alongside his mistress. Yet following a divorce, he could not have provided her with anything resembling the lifestyle he had enjoyed as Nancy's husband. For that reason, prosecutors argued that his renewed desire to preserve the marriage had never been sincere. Persuading Nancy to abandon the divorce and allow him back into the house meant Richard could remain positioned to inherit her savings and receive the $500,000 benefit from her life insurance policy. Even more importantly, moving back in gave him the opportunity he needed to continue putting chemicals into whatever she consumed. Richard's mistress remained loyal to him, although several parts of her account ultimately made him appear even more questionable. She told investigators Richard had said Nancy suffered from a rare blood disorder and likely had little time remaining. Yet Nancy had never received such a diagnosis, and Richard had made that statement months before she became seriously sick for the first time. He had additionally promised his mistress that they would eventually marry, and their affair remained secret even after he returned to Nancy's home and supposedly started working to preserve their marriage. The defense relied on the same 3 explanations Richard had previously presented during his press conference. Nancy had either been murdered by Bill, killed by her former boss, or had been consuming small quantities of arsenic herself in hopes of winning Richard back. To reinforce that last explanation, Richard's lawyers introduced what initially seemed like important evidence. Richard said he had discovered an invoice among Nancy's possessions indicating that she had ordered several chemicals, including arsenic. The paperwork even seemed to bear Nancy's signature, making it appear that she herself had submitted the order. However, the claim quickly collapsed when the company's owner appeared in court. He testified that his business had never sold any of the chemicals listed there, and that its invoices were always handwritten on entirely different forms, rather than typed like the document Richard supposedly discovered. In short, the invoice could not possibly have been authentic, and rather than strengthening Richard's defense, it gave prosecutors another basis for believing he had attempted to frame Nancy. Nevertheless, the defense made one final effort to persuade jurors that Nancy could have poisoned herself, and that possibility remained central to their argument, despite the medical evidence indicating repeated exposure over time. They argued that her actions, rather than Richard's conduct, could explain the arsenic found in her body and the mysterious illnesses that had preceded her death in the months before her death. They consulted a psychiatrist who had never encountered Nancy during her lifetime. Relying only on discussions with Richard and newspaper reports about the case, he determined that Nancy might have experienced psychological difficulties and perhaps deliberately consumed poison to persuade her husband to return to her and resume their marriage, despite the lack of any direct evidence that Nancy had actually suffered from a psychological condition that would explain such behavior. However, prosecutors had a far more compelling answer to that argument. After Nancy entered the hospital and told a doctor that she suspected she had been poisoned, she also pleaded with him to keep her alive and save her life. Had Nancy intentionally swallowed arsenic, it would have made little sense for her to beg physicians for help while withholding the identity of what she had consumed. Merely identifying the poison could have enabled doctors to start the proper medical treatment at once and offered her at least a possibility of surviving the poisoning. Ultimately, jurors rejected all of the defense's explanations, and Richard was convicted of Nancy's murder. The judge subsequently sentenced him to life imprisonment and ordered him to pay a $10,000 fine. During the years afterward, Richard made repeated efforts to overturn his conviction. His first attempt rested on the argument that prosecutors had built their entire case from circumstantial evidence alone rather than direct proof. After that effort failed, he accused his attorney of mishandling the trial and sought a new proceeding. However, in 1994, an appeals court determined that the evidence against Richard was overwhelming, essentially destroying his prospects of having the conviction reversed. For decades afterward, Richard continued publicly maintaining that he was innocent. He eventually contacted several organizations devoted to investigating wrongful convictions, yet none agreed to represent him or pursue his case. Nevertheless, he attracted a small circle of supporters who established a website explaining why they believed his conviction had been unjust. Meanwhile, Nancy and Richard's daughters had essentially lost both parents. Following Richard's arrest, Nancy's relatives took the girls into their care. It was later revealed that after Nancy started suspecting Richard was poisoning her, she had secretly changed the beneficiary of her life insurance policy. The $500 Zuzone payment would instead be directed to her daughters rather than Richard, meaning he would have received nothing even if he had avoided conviction. Today, Richard remains incarcerated. He first became eligible for parole in 2006, but the board rejected his request, partly because he continued denying responsibility for Nancy's death. He applied again 10 years later, but received the same negative decision once again for essentially the same reason. His latest attempt occurred in the spring of 2026. Yet the parole board once more declined to release him, despite his being nearly 70 years old. At this stage, there is a genuine possibility Richard may never leave prison and could spend the remainder of his life behind bars. December 14, 2023, Broomfield, Colorado. At first glance, it seems like the sort of peaceful, quiet suburb where residents assume nothing terrible will occur. That's the picture the city confidently presents. Yet the statistics paint another picture. Official crime data repeatedly rank Broomfield among Colorado communities with one of the highest overall levels of serious violent crime. Around noon, the quiet inside the emergency dispatch center is broken by a call for emergency assistance. A man phones from work and asks officers to check his house. The request sounds ordinary, simply a welfare check. He explains that his wife has abruptly stopped responding to her phone. Within minutes, an officer reaches the residence at the address. From outside, nothing at all looks unusual. The windows are undamaged from the outside, and a dog can be heard whimpering indoors. Nobody answers after the officer knocks repeatedly on the door. He chooses to peer through a small window in the garage. At that moment, the seemingly routine call takes an entirely different turn. The officer quickly forces the metal garage door open. On the concrete floor beside a gray Mazda, he finds 43-year-old Crystal Krug. She is already dead by then. But one crucial detail here dramatically alters how investigators would normally approach a case like this. Most victims are taken by surprise. Crystal, however, had spent the prior 2 months in a continual state of vigilance. Carefully and intentionally, she had transformed her home into a fortress. She installed sophisticated surveillance equipment, hired a private investigator to uncover possible threats, and completed firearms training. When officers discovered her, she remained dressed in her winter coat, her keys held in her hand. Her purse contained a fully loaded handgun, its safety already switched off. She was ready to protect herself at a moment's notice, yet the gun never came out of her bag. Investigators examine every part of the property, expecting evidence of forced entry. Shattered windows, strange footprints, anything indicating an intruder had battled their way inside. Instead, the entire perimeter remains completely undisturbed. How could someone approach a person who spent every day anticipating an attack? The clue comes from inside the home's electronic security system. The primary camera watching the front entrance had been intentionally obstructed. Someone had carefully placed a strip of blue painter's tape over the lens. The interior alarm system had likewise been fully deactivated. What strikes me is how much preparation went into it. Whoever was responsible possessed complete access to the home's smart technology and understood Crystal's daily schedule down to the minute. This individual hadn't broken into the fortress from outside. They were already within its blind spots. As police begin securing the neighborhood, something unexpected occurs. Soon, Crystal's relatives start getting fresh text messages. The messages seem to originate from Crystal's cell phone, yet there's a serious problem. By then, the medical examiner has already determined her time of death. At the moment those texts were sent, Crystal was already dead. The digital evidence only deepens the mystery. To understand who succeeded in bypassing all her defenses, we need to return and examine more closely what looked like an ideal suburban life. Labor 2022. Before we can understand what happened, we need to know who Crystal truly was and what lay beneath the polished appearance of her comfortable suburban existence. Crystal Krug was not the type of person who seemed easy to frighten. She worked as a lead biochemical engineer at Agian Technologies, one of the world's foremost scientific and life sciences companies. Her team developed highly advanced medical technology, including tools designed to monitor cancer cells and conduct complex DNA analysis. In the workplace, colleagues knew her for determination, a practical approach, and an unusual talent for solving some of the toughest analytical problems. Co-workers repeatedly portrayed her as the expert that entire projects relied upon. Away from the laboratory, she pursued a hobby that exposed another part of her character. On weekends, she could often be found beside her father, Lars, in the garage, restoring classic American muscle cars while her hands were coated in grease. Later that evening, the same woman might walk onto the Colorado Conservatory stage as a professionally trained classical dancer. It's an unusual combination that instantly catches your eye. Scientific precision, graceful dancing, and the toughness of automotive mechanics all existing within one person. Crystal handled every area of life in much the same manner. She preferred control, reducing each problem to its smallest details before working toward a solution. Her husband, Daniel Krug, had developed a notable career as well. He occupied a senior leadership role managing operations for the Colorado Department of Public Health. They had shared 16 years of marriage, 3 sons and daughters, and seemingly possessed everything commonly linked to the American dream. A successful government career, an accomplished scientist, and a picture-perfect family beneath the Rocky Mountains. But investigators understand better than most that when they start examining a family's past, the polished exterior frequently proves to be exactly that, an appearance carefully maintained for the outside world. Beneath that carefully maintained surface, private pressures and tensions existed that outsiders could not easily see or understand at all. By late 2022, the marriage had essentially collapsed. Their relationship had reached a stage beyond repair. They began sleeping in different bedrooms and functioned more like roommates, leading entirely separate lives beneath one roof. Crystal told trusted friends plainly that she had finally decided to leave the marriage because she could no longer tolerate living with Daniel. Those familiar with the couple portrayed Daniel as a man with an unhealthy desire to control nearly everything about those around him. Several people likened him to the person controlling the strings within the household. He was accustomed to managing everything, whether in his leadership position at the state health department or inside his home. Eventually, Crystal's independent nature and strong sense of identity left her feeling as though she could no longer breathe there. Consistent with her analytical way of thinking, she avoided emotional confrontations and dramatic disputes. Instead, she handled the circumstances just as she handled every challenging issue throughout her life. Quietly and methodically, step by step, she started making preparations for a safe divorce. Crystal thoroughly examined the family's finances, collected crucial records, and privately spoke with lawyers about potential custody plans involving their 3 sons and daughters. She was constructing a comprehensive strategy for leaving. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed to answer with outright denial and increasing hostility. For a person holding such a high-ranking government position, divorce represented more than losing a wife. It endangered the carefully preserved image of a successful family man he had spent years creating. He would not allow her to leave. For someone who needed control, surrendering it meant seeing his entire world unravel. Within their attractive suburban house, a silent conflict took hold. Two extremely intelligent, calculating individuals now shared one home as adversaries pursuing entirely different objectives. With each passing month, the pressure intensified, while Crystal remained just one legal move from formally ending the separation. Everything appeared headed toward a challenging yet foreseeable divorce, until another person unexpectedly stepped into the story. On October 2, 2023, the continuing dispute within the Krug household was suddenly overshadowed by something nobody expected. Crystal received a deeply unsettling text from someone calling himself Anthony Holland. He was an actual person she had briefly known while attending college in 1999. Over 20 years had gone by, and they had had no contact since then. The message included explicit sexual material. Initially, it appeared to be merely spam or an unusual joke from long ago. Yet the sender soon shifted his approach, progressing from offensive messages to unmistakable threats. More troubling still, this online stalker seemed to possess a disturbing amount of knowledge about Crystal's everyday routine. He taunted her, saying he had spotted her vehicle in the parking lot at her dentist's office, and had also noticed that her license plate registration was expired. By month's end, the harassment had escalated to a completely different level. The unidentified sender sent a photograph of Daniel taken in the parking lot outside his workplace. The picture came with a frightening message saying that her husband would soon be taken care of. Consider how most people might respond if someone began tracking their everyday movements and openly suggested hurting a member of their family. Most people would panic. Crystal did not. She returned to the same careful, methodical process that shaped every area of her life. Although her marriage was breaking down, she had no wish whatsoever to see harm come to the father of her 3 sons and daughters. On November 7th, she entered Detective Andrew Martinez's office at the local police department. Rather than delivering a distressed, disorganized account, she set a neatly arranged Excel spreadsheet before him. Every piece of information had been recorded with remarkable accuracy. Dates, precise times, every text message received, email addresses, and the full wording of every message. This was not merely a complaint. It was a meticulously prepared investigative record constructed through reason rather than emotion. Investigators immediately treated the matter as a priority. Their first task was figuring out how the stalker knew so much. They needed to understand where the information was coming from, whether the sender had physical access to Crystal, and whether someone close to her was feeding him details. The answer would soon force investigators to reconsider everything they thought they understood. Crystal's vehicle was raised onto a lift for a complete and detailed examination. Officers combed over every single part of the car with flashlights, searching beneath the chassis for hidden GPS trackers, inspecting the wheel wells, and thoroughly checking the cabin for concealed surveillance equipment. Nothing at all turned up. No trackers, no concealed devices. Somehow, the person sending those messages knew precisely where Crystal was headed. Without installing even one physical device on her vehicle, something else entirely unexpected suddenly unfolded within the Krug household. As the threat from outside grew increasingly more dangerous, Daniel's conduct shifted dramatically. The controlling husband Crystal had been attempting to leave suddenly assumed the role of protector. He personally assisted with installing additional security cameras around the home. At night, he intentionally kept a heavy steel bat beside the bed, showing he was ready to protect the family if necessary. The couple also came up with a nickname for the stalker, Kickman. They took it from the email address used to send the anonymous messages. I've reviewed many case files like this, and one pattern consistently stands out to me. Genuine outside pressure can reshape relationships. The arrival of this stalker actually achieved something Daniel had never managed through arguments or persuasion. Confronted by a common threat, the two became a team again. Fear of the unseen Kickman persuaded Crystal to trust her husband, remain beside him, and relax her guard within the one place she believed was becoming secure again. She was now depending on the very person she had been so determined to leave just weeks before. By then, investigators had what appeared to be a major breakthrough in the case. The private investigator Crystal had retained months earlier had done exceptional work, tracing physical locations tied to Anthony to addresses in Utah and Idaho. On paper, the next move simply appeared completely obvious. Send investigators, find the suspect, and make an arrest. But the American justice system doesn't work that way. Before a judge could authorize an arrest warrant, detectives required solid and reliable digital evidence. They needed to establish through technology company records that the threatening emails had actually originated from IP addresses associated with that person. Without a direct connection between the online activity and a real individual, the entire case could likely collapse entirely in court. And that's when a series of critical administrative delays began. The lead detective filed a legal request with Google for account records. At the investigation's most critical point, a simple human mistake changed everything. One character in the stalker's email address had been entered incorrectly on the paperwork. That lone typo brought the legal process to a complete and sudden halt. While officials corrected the paperwork and the request had to pass through the system again, the amended warrant did not arrive at Google's legal department until December 6th. Each day lost gave whoever was directing the harassment more additional time to prepare for whatever came next. Now, let's return to December 14th, the day of the crime. Remember that morning call to emergency services? If you listen carefully to Daniel's conversation with the dispatcher, something immediately stands out clearly. He isn't merely asking officers to check his home. From the start of the call, he repeatedly advances his own theory about what occurred. He keeps mentioning Anthony Holland by name, almost telling officers exactly whom they should seek. In other words, he names a suspect before responding officers have even found Crystal's body. The Broomfield Police Department immediately follows that lead, believing the stalker had finally carried out his threats. Detectives swiftly coordinate with law enforcement in Utah, beginning a multi-state investigation. Investigators find Anthony and start getting ready to place him under arrest. Then the entire theory collapses. Sometimes one simple fact is enough to unravel even the most carefully assembled investigation. While everything was unfolding in Colorado, the real Anthony Holland was shopping at a major retail store in Utah. He stood quietly at the checkout, purchasing a green sweater. He possessed a valid receipt showing the precise time of the transaction. Store surveillance cameras verified his presence minute by minute, recording his face clearly and eliminating any reasonable doubt. I keep returning to one question. How can someone create such a complicated scheme while overlooking the simplest rules of the physical world? The distance from the crime scene to that shopping center was roughly 500 meters. Nobody could commit a violent attack in Colorado and somehow reach a checkout line in another state at almost precisely the same time. Crystal's former acquaintance had absolutely nothing to do with the crime. He was merely going about his life, entirely unaware that another person was using his identity as the public face of a frightening harassment campaign. Police finally understood the disturbing reality. All along, they had been pursuing a phantom. The supposed outside threat had never existed. From the outset, it had been a deliberately manufactured illusion. The investigation immediately makes a 180 degrees turn. Detectives now concentrate on the person who had worked harder than anyone else to persuade them that an unseen stalker was real. Once Anani's airtight alibi was verified, investigators redirected their full attention toward the man demanding justice most loudly. That's when digital forensics specialist Randy Pellock emerged as a crucial figure in the investigation. Luckily, he wasn't beginning from nothing. Crystal had already completed an extraordinary amount of the groundwork herself. The carefully arranged spreadsheet she left behind containing dates, internet records, and full copies of every threatening message became a blueprint for the technical investigation. PL reviewed the original email headers and started tracking the sender's network activity. Provider records directed investigators toward a public guest Wi-Fi network. But this was not a coffee shop, hotel, or public library. The wireless router sat inside the Colorado Department of Public Health building in Glendale, exactly where Daniel worked. It's striking how frequently people with authority persuade themselves that they're smarter than the system. Daniel apparently thought using the building's guest Wi-Fi would make him completely anonymous. He failed to consider something far more basic. Modern corporate networks record virtually everything. When Randy Pellock examined the network logs, the evidence was impossible to dismiss. At the precise times those disturbing messages were transmitted, only one device was connected to that particular access point. Its unique MAC address belonged to Daniel's personal smartphone. From that point onward, the evidence began falling together with remarkable speed. Investigators learned that the anonymous calls had originated from a prepaid burner phone bought without requiring personal identification, while its account had been reloaded with a $50 Walmart gift card. Detectives subpoenaed Walmart's transaction records and obtained the precise purchase time down to the millisecond. They then secured surveillance footage from the store covering that exact moment. The video revealed everything investigators needed with virtually no remaining doubt to connect the purchase, the phone, and the person responsible, providing the final piece of evidence required to understand exactly what had happened. While the cashier activated the gift card, Daniel was standing right there at the register himself, paying for it himself. Without knowing what he was doing, he had personally and unknowingly financed the very instrument used to conduct months of harassment within his own home. Yet the most incredible and revealing error was concealed within the photograph's metadata. Remember the picture of Daniel standing in the office parking lot, the one the anonymous sender had used while claiming he would soon be attacked? A forensic review of the photo's hidden EXIF metadata revealed an entirely different and deeply troubling story. Nobody had been secretly lurking nearby and watching him at all. The photograph had been captured with the smartphone's built-in timer. Daniel merely set his phone on the trunk of a nearby vehicle, moved into position, waited for the countdown, and took the image himself. He then deliberately sent that staged picture to Crystal, trying to persuade her that somebody was tracking him. What appeared to be a month-long assault by an unseen stalker was actually an elaborate act, and Daniel had served as both director and leading actor throughout the entire performance. To understand just how far this disturbing scheme went, detectives started examining Daniel's past. Before long, they located someone who had known him in 2001, his former college girlfriend. What she eventually revealed to investigators was deeply shocking and disturbing. More than 20 years earlier, Daniel had orchestrated nearly the identical scheme. Following a particularly painful breakup, he created fraudulent online accounts, altered his voice during phone calls, and spent months frightening her by manufacturing the impression that an unknown outsider was stalking her. This was not something he had suddenly invented during a difficult divorce. It was a pattern, a method he had already tried years earlier. Instilling fear had long been his method of keeping total control over the women in his life. The only meaningful difference between then and now was that 2 decades earlier, the campaign remained limited to psychological intimidation. This time the stakes were far greater, and the elaborate digital act eventually crossed into the physical world. With overwhelming digital evidence secured, prosecutors now faced one final assignment: reconstruct the crime's physical timeline for the jury. Let's return to the evening before everything unfolded. At 8:05 p.m., Daniel opened his web browser and typed a very specific question. How hard do you have to hit someone in the head to make them lose consciousness? Nothing whatsoever about it was spontaneous or accidental. It showed deliberate, calculated preparation. Early the next morning, after Crystal left home to take their son and daughters to school, Daniel remained behind. How he defeated the home's security turned out to have a surprisingly simple answer. A neighbor's security camera recorded him walking onto the front porch at 8:15 a.m., covering the outside surveillance camera with tape, before quietly disabling the home's internal alarm system. When Crystal came back and entered the garage, he attacked her from behind. He hit her several times in the back of the head with a heavy object, causing her to collapse onto the concrete floor before she could reach the loaded handgun in her purse. Then came a final knife wound to the chest. Afterward, he used Crystal's phone to compose the text messages that seemed to indicate the stalker had vanished, scheduling them for later delivery. But technology revealed the deception. The phone's internal gyroscope showed that when those messages were sent, the device remained completely motionless. That eliminated the possibility that anyone was actively typing on it at that moment. Another detail initially left investigators without an explanation. How had Daniel later appeared wearing completely and entirely clean clothes? One of the couple's daughters told investigators that her father returned home that evening, wearing what seemed to be the same shirt he had left wearing earlier that day. The answer was concealed along his route to work. At one point, Daniel manually turned off the dashboard camera in his vehicle. During that 30-minute gap, investigators believe he discarded important evidence and changed into an identical outfit he had prepared beforehand. He was arrested on December 16th in a parking lot. As officers forced him onto the ground, he looked at them and said confidently, "So, do you want me to tell my son and daughters that I was responsible for their mother's death, or is someone else going to do it?" April 2025, the final verdict is formally delivered. Life in prison without the possibility of parole plus an additional 9 years. As the sentence is announced, Daniel's expression does not change. Not one muscle in his face moves. Today, Crystal's own brother is raising her son and daughters while also supporting legislation called Crystal's Law. The proposed measure would require technology companies to immediately answer emergency law enforcement requests for vital and critical digital records, aiming to prevent bureaucratic delays from ever giving another offender enough time to carry out a planned crime. It is a contradiction beyond human understanding. A cherished family of 5 massacred amid the pitch-black silence of their own bedrooms. The scene resembled utterly absolute ruin, saturated with the metallic odor of inconceivable fury. Yet the most horrifying detail was not the deliberate savagery of the beating itself. It was the horrifying truth that the man who found their shattered bodies, the man sobbing beneath the flashing cameras, was the very same monster who wielded the hammer. He erased their entire future, not for money, but because of a subdued, festering envy that had entirely corrupted his soul. North Epping lies roughly 12 miles northwest of Sydney's central business district. It is the kind of prosperous, tree-lined suburb where crime statistics have historically been an afterthought, defined by manicured lawns, 2-story brick houses, and a deep and profound sense of separation from the city's harshness. Residents deeply cherish their peaceful privacy and familiar routine. Within this immaculate enclave on Boundary Road, the Lynn family carefully created their refuge, a physical expression of a grueling, unrelenting pursuit of prosperity. 45-year-old Min and his 43-year-old wife, Yun Lee, known by customers as Lily, consistently represented the immigrant work ethic in its purest form. They had not inherited their wealth through family privilege. They earned it through sheer physical and mental stamina, day after day, with little relief. The couple owned and ran the Rawson Street News Agency, a business requiring a punishing timetable. Their mornings routinely started at 3:30. While the rest of the neighborhood remained asleep, Min and Lily were already up, enduring bitter 40 degrees Fahrenheit winter mornings while sorting huge incoming deliveries throughout the long working day. Operating a highly successful news agency is no passive investment. It demands intense physical work. Min regularly carried tightly packed stacks of newspapers and magazines, weighing upwards of 50 pounds, separating them, arranging delivery routes, and overseeing a steady stream of inventory. Lily carefully managed logistics, finances, and the retail floor with painstaking care. The Rawson Street shop was a high-traffic center. Customers streamed in constantly during morning commutes, buying lotto tickets, stationery, and daily broadsheets. Min and Lily remained standing for over 10 hours each day, their hands continually marked by the dark ink of newsprint. Despite the tiring repetition, they kept an immaculate storefront, substantially outperforming rival businesses across the surrounding miles. When the sun finally crossed the horizon, their store had become the pulse of the local community in every visible detail. Min ran the front counter with total efficiency, recalling the exact purchasing habits of hundreds of locals. He was a constant presence in their daily routines, knowing precisely what they needed before they even reached the register. The news agency's financial success was truly undeniable, but the Lynns did not work 14-hour days for personal luxury. Every dollar they earned was directed straight toward their children's future. There were 3 children, 15-year-old Brenda, 12-year-old Henry, and 9-year-old Terry. Min and Lily built a formidable financial shield so their children would never be forced to endure the same punishing manual work. The boys and their elder sister attended top-tier schools, received private tutoring, and took part in costly extracurricular activities. Their parents expected academic excellence, supplying every imaginable resource to secure their children's upward mobility. They wanted the children to have every advantage their parents had lacked, and they invested heavily in education, expecting those sacrifices to translate into a secure future. Their expectations for the children remained clear, demanding, and unwavering from the very beginning. On Boundary Road, the Lynn residence functioned as a lively multi-generational center. Lily's 39-year-old sister, Yoon Bin, known as Irene, lived there with the family as well. A university student, Irene regularly assisted at the news agency during busy periods, helping relieve the pressure on her sister and brother-in-law. She fit naturally into the home's constant commotion, becoming a second mother to the boys whenever Min and Lily were confined behind the shop counter. Seen from outside, the Lynn family embodied ultimate success. They had crossed oceans, learned a foreign culture, and conquered their local economy through sheer determination and solidarity. Their large, richly furnished house stood as evidence of their perseverance. Neighbors respected them, Customers adored them, and they remained deeply committed to their family lineage. They had created a life that seemed completely protected against failure and danger. Yet that same success, the obvious and undeniable evidence of men's authority as providers, was quietly producing a poisonous consequence inside their extended family. The fortune they had amassed to safeguard their children was also functioning as a mirror, exposing the perceived shortcomings of those positioned just beyond the immediate light of their prosperity. Migration can be a merciless equalizer. It removes former titles, previous prestige, and established social position, forcing a person to establish their value all over again within an unfamiliar country. For some, including the owners of the Rawson Street News Agency, this empty slate offered the chance to create an empire through unrelenting physical effort. For others, however, losing status becomes a psychological toxin. That was precisely Robert City's reality. Born Leon Binchy, Robert had once enjoyed enormous respect in Guangzhou, China. He was a highly educated ear, nose, and throat specialist, an intellectual, a scientist, and a physician accustomed to the absolute deference of his patients and colleagues. But when he arrived in Sydney, his medical qualifications had no currency whatsoever. To practice medicine legally in his adopted country, he would have needed years of exhausting retraining, subordinate internships, and difficult examinations conducted in a second language. Robert completely refused to accept what he considered humiliation. Rather than adjust to the difficult realities of immigrant life, he looked for easier routes toward financial control. He temporarily moved to Melbourne and entered hospitality, opening a restaurant. The venture ended disastrously, collapsing because of poor management while consuming his resources. Beaten and embarrassed, he returned to Sydney and settled in a modest house on Beck Street. The property stood scarcely a quarter-mile from the expansive Boundary Road estate. That tiny physical gap would ultimately become the birthplace of a deadly, consuming envy. Robert remained chronically unemployed. His days were spent shut inside his house, watching computer screens and trying to day trade the stock market with decidedly mediocre results. Eventually, he depended completely on financial assistance from his wife, Kathy, Min's younger sister. Within the traditional family hierarchy, that arrangement was deeply emasculating. Among the extended relatives, Min was the golden son, the unquestioned patriarch, and the supreme provider. Min and Kathy's elderly parents had immigrated too, and lived with Robert and Kathy on Beck Street. Yet the elders' affection was completely claimed by their accomplished son. Each family dinner, holiday celebration, and informal afternoon tea became a painful examination of Robert's shortcomings, subtly disguised as praise for Min. The elders repeatedly emphasized the news agency's rising profits, their grandchildren's perfect academic records, and the formidable work ethic of the man supporting them all. Robert carried a volatile mixture of grandiosity and profound insecurity. He considered himself intellectually superior by every possible measure. To him, Min was simply a manual laborer, someone who unceremoniously carried heavy bundles of magazines and tallied loose coins behind a shop counter. Robert had been a physician, yet somehow life was lavishly rewarding the laborer while deliberately penalizing the intellectual. That contradiction gradually hardened into a muted, poisonous fury. He could never escape the dazzling shadow of his brother-in-law's achievements. He had to watch men buy expensive cars, pay for prestigious private tutoring, and earn the admiration of the entire community. From the outside, Robert carefully maintained the image of a kind, devoted uncle. He remained a familiar figure at the Boundary Road house. Casting himself as a teacher, he routinely tutored the young boys in higher mathematics and played badminton with them behind the house. At family birthday celebrations, he smiled before cameras and portrayed himself as a dependable source of family support. Yet anyone watching carefully could detect tiny cracks beneath his disguise. He was intensely dissatisfied with how the news agency operated. He repeatedly dispensed unwanted business advice, recommending forceful expansion plans and trying to involve himself in financial decisions. Min courteously yet decisively dismissed every proposal. Min had no need for counsel from an unemployed relative who had already driven a restaurant into bankruptcy. For someone narcissistic like Robert, those mild refusals felt like devastating, unforgivable humiliations. The fear of losing face was gradually eroding his sanity. He felt ignored, dishonored, and completely worthless. Robert convinced himself that if the reigning patriarch were permanently taken out of the equation, the family hierarchy would automatically rearrange itself. The money, the business, and the final authority would fall to him. At last, he would become the family's rescuer and the dynasty's leader. By the winter of 2009, that smoldering resentment had solidified into a disturbing tactical goal. Robert intimately understood the layout of the Boundary Road sanctuary. He knew every resident's exact routine, where the primary electrical breaker box sat, and that their brutal work schedules ensured they would sleep deeply. The keen analytical mind he had once employed to treat patients had now been entirely redirected. Alone inside his home, amid declining stock charts and the crushing burden of his own mediocrity, he carefully planned the complete destruction of his own family. Friday, July 17, 2009. Another punishing shift had ended. The thick metal shutters at the Rawson Street news agency clattered down, sealing in the day's earnings. Men and Lily traveled the short distance home to Boundary Road. Their bodies ached. The enormous physical strain of carrying 50-pound newsprint bundles throughout the week had left them utterly exhausted. They entered their refuge. They shared a late dinner with Irene and the two boys. The home was locked. The alarm had been activated. One after another, the lights went dark. By midnight, the Boundary Road home had fallen entirely quiet. The occupants slipped into the deep, weighty sleep of exhausted workers. A quarter of a mile away on Beck Street, sleep was absent. Robert C. was fully awake. His wife, Kathy, slept beside him. The elderly parents rested farther down the hallway. Complete silence filled the house that night. Robert prepared himself carefully. He dressed in dark layers intended to conceal possible spatter. He pulled on a particular pair of Axe running shoes, selected for their quiet grip. He took hold of a heavy altered tool, a weapon resembling a mechanic's hammer joined to a martial arts rope device. Its weight had been balanced precisely to increase kinetic force while reducing the exertion needed for repeated blows. He exited through the rear door into the bitter cold. Temperatures had fallen to a harsh 40 degrees F. The winter air felt keen and biting. He followed the route he knew well. No car, no engine sound, only the steady crunch of rubber soles across frozen pavement. The neighborhood appeared deserted. Street lights cast no illumination along his route. He moved through the darkness with a surgeon's precision. He arrived at the Boundary Road estate's edge. In the darkness, the house looked huge and formidable. He went toward the outer brick wall. He knew precisely where the main electrical box had been installed. He opened the metal cover. He seized the main breaker. Click. Within the house, the refrigerator's faint hum stopped. The digital displays on the microwaves and ovens turned black. The outdoor motion sensor floodlights went dead. The alarm system, reliant on the primary power network and without a backup battery, was immediately disabled. Complete, suffocating darkness descended across the property. Robert walked toward the front entrance. He did not smash a window. He did not force a lock. He had a key, a spare given to him through unquestioning family trust. The metal cylinder rotated effortlessly. The substantial oak door opened wide. He entered. The air within was warm, heavy with the smell of a sleeping household. Robert had no need for illumination. He understood this home's layout better than he understood the charts of his collapsing stocks. He knew precisely how far the foyer stood from the bottom of the staircase. He started climbing. The wooden steps creaked faintly beneath his weight. He altered his footing, pushing his boots against the outermost edges of each step to dampen the noise. He advanced slowly, deliberately, and reached the second-floor landing. 4 bedrooms, 5 victims. He went first toward the master suite, the main target, Min and Lily. The door stood slightly ajar. The couple's steady, deep breathing resonated through the enclosed room. Robert moved toward the mattress's right side, Min's side, the patriarch, the man whose presence overshadowed him. Robert could not get away. He lifted the heavy-weighted weapon above his shoulder. The opening blow was devastating. A nauseating wet crack ripped through the midnight quiet. Min did not awaken. The impact immediately disabled his central nervous system. Lily jerked awake. The savage movement beside her broke through her sleep. Before her eyes could adapt to the absolute darkness, the weapon descended again, brief, savage, merciless. The mattress collapsed beneath the tremendous force of the strikes. The breathing ceased. Instantly, the room's atmosphere changed. Warmth gave way to the overpowering metallic odor of blood gathering below. It splattered the headboard, covered the walls, and penetrated the thick duvet. Robert did not stop. His adrenaline was surging. The kinetic force was already moving. He turned from the destroyed bed. He exited the master suite, the second doorway. Irene, she was an exceptionally light sleeper. The muffled impacts from the neighboring room had awakened her. When Robert shoved her door open, she was already reacting. She sat upright. Darkness concealed the attacker's face, yet the danger was unmistakable. Irene resisted. She refused to yield to the darkness. She scrambled along the wall, kicking outward, her hands flailing blindly to block the approaching blows. The bedroom's cramped space turned into a frenzied battlefield. The attacker's harsh breathing, her frantic gasps for air, the muted, crushing sounds of metal breaking bone. For one brief moment, she managed to knock the weapon away from her skull, absorbing the devastating blows across her forearms. Her bones fractured beneath the overwhelming power of the swinging hammer, but she had nowhere to escape. The attack continued without mercy. The weapon slipped past her broken defense. It reached its target. The fight was finished. Heavy silence descended upon the room once more, broken only by the constant dripping of fluid onto the carpets. 3 dead, 2 were left. The boys' bedroom lay at the distant end of the hallway. 12-year-old Henry and 9-year-old Terry. The brutal confrontation inside Irene's room had made noise. The plaster walls had trembled. The muffled cries had traveled along the hallway. The boys were awake. They were terrified, frozen by the impossible nightmare taking place in the complete darkness of their own house. They had nowhere to flee, no telephone to use. Robert entered their doorway. He was no longer the affectionate uncle who played badminton behind the house. He had become a faceless, blood-covered silhouette, sealing off their only escape. Henry, the older brother, reacted first. Instinct for survival propelled him from beneath the blankets. The weapon swept through a savage horizontal arc. The boy fell before he could reach the room's center. Terry, young and defenseless, was cornered against his bed frame. The level of violence necessary to destroy a 9-year-old child in his pajamas defies rational human thought, yet Robert was functioning solely on the poisonous fuel of his own jealousy. These children were successors to the empire he desired. They were living symbols of men's financial power. They needed to disappear so the hierarchy could be restored. The blows continued falling. The excess violence was horrifying. This was not merely a calculated killing. It represented the physical expression of years of buried humiliation and fury. The bedroom's structural condition was completely destroyed. Blood soaked the carpets, textbooks, and toys. Then everything stopped. The slaughter was finished. The entire house stood motionless. The sole noise was Robert's own ragged, labored breathing reverberating through the darkness. He remained in the hallway, encircled by the complete destruction of his own family line. The coppery smell was so intense it scorched the back of his throat. His muscles ached from the immense physical strain of swinging the heavy instrument dozens of times. He looked downward. In the darkness, he could not see the floorboards, but he could feel the slippery tackiness clinging to the rubber soles of his sneakers. He stepped backward, his right foot landing on a section of hardwood flooring beside the master bedroom. Blood from the intricate tread design on his shoe transferred straight onto the polished timber. One incomplete footprint. It was only a partial trace, almost too faint to notice, yet it represented the one physical clue his careful preparation had failed to erase completely from the scene that night inside the house entirely. In the vast scale of the slaughter, it was microscopic, a minuscule, almost undetectable mistake concealed within the pitch-black darkness, yet it existed. Robert turned around and descended the stairs. He crossed the foyer. He opened the front entrance. The icy 40 degrees air struck his face, a jarring, sharp contrast against the suffocating metallic warmth radiating from upstairs. He drew the door closed behind him. The lock snapped shut. He left the porch and disappeared into the shadows of Boundary Road. The suburban road remained utterly still. Not one dog barked. Not one neighbor switched on a light to see what was happening. The wealthy enclave continued sleeping, entirely unaware that one of its most prominent families had just been violently erased from existence. Robert covered the quarter-mile to Beck Street on foot. He entered through the rear door. He removed his dark, blood-soaked clothes. He carefully scrubbed the heavy, blunt weapon, making certain that no organic residue remained inside the grooves. He wrapped the aseptic sneakers for complete disposal. He stood beneath the shower. He scrubbed the blood from his body. Physical evidence spiraled into the drain, leaving behind only the cold, brutal truth of what he had done. He went back to bed. He stretched out beside his sleeping wife. He shut his eyes. He waited for daylight. Saturday morning broke clear and bitterly cold across North Epping. By 5 a.m., the intersection beyond the Rossin Street News Agency was already crowded with its customary stream of foot traffic. Commuters, construction workers, and early walkers tightened their coats against the biting wind, expecting the warm storefront glow and the familiar, efficient presence of Min and Lily. Instead, they encountered a solid metal barrier. The thick steel security shutters were still firmly locked, secured against the concrete pavement. Huge stacks of Saturday newspapers, weighing hundreds of pounds altogether, lay haphazardly across the frost-covered sidewalk, completely untouched by the owners, who normally sorted them hours before sunrise. At any other retail business, an unexpected shutdown might have caused little more than temporary irritation. At the Lin family's carefully operated shop, it was comparable to a screaming air raid siren. They had never missed a morning shift for years. The community knew the owner's relentless work ethic firsthand. A late opening was not a simple scheduling mistake. It was an unmistakable, disturbing irregularity. Once the clock moved beyond 7 a.m., the frustrated regulars began leaving, quickly replaced by a growing sense of collective unease. Whispers started moving among neighboring shopkeepers. Calls to the lines went directly to voicemail. The complete silence from the normally highly communicative couple was frightening. A few miles away on Beck Street, Robert Z was already awake, carefully arranging the next crucial stage of his grim performance. He knew the news agency had not opened. He knew anxious calls from neighbors were receiving no answer. His next move had to be timed exactly. At about 9 a.m., he stepped into his newly adopted role, the deeply worried patriarch waiting in the wings. He and Kathy climbed into their vehicle and drove the short, familiar route to the Boundary Road estate to check on their relatives. Outside, the large brick house appeared completely untouched. Morning sunlight fell across the manicured front lawn, showing no evidence whatsoever of forced entry. Kathy took her spare key and unlocked the heavy oak front door. Together, they entered the broad foyer. The house was ice cold. The primary electrical breaker was still tripped, leaving the interior immersed in dense, unnatural darkness, even as bright daylight pushed against the closed window blinds. Kathy called for her brother. Her voice bounced from the high ceilings, answered only by a crushing, suffocating silence. Inside the residence, the air was extraordinarily dense, poisoned by an overpowering, sickly sweet metallic smell that caught harshly at the back of the throat. It was the unmistakable odor of enormous biological trauma. They approached the staircase. The stillness inside the house made the tension unbearable. Kathy went up first, placing each foot slowly and cautiously upon the hardwood. Robert stayed immediately behind her, following the same wooden staircase he had climbed only hours earlier carrying a heavy weapon. They arrived at the second-floor landing. The master suite door stood completely open. What they saw was devastating and beyond comprehension. The walls, ceiling, heavy oak furnishings, everything was covered in deep, saturated crimson. The damage inflicted on Min and Lily was so horrific that Kathy's mind could not immediately comprehend the scene. The bedroom itself had effectively become a complete slaughterhouse. She fell hard against the doorframe, her knees giving way beneath the overwhelming horror of what she had found. A raw, soul-shattering scream ripped through the suffocating quiet of the Boundary Road sanctuary. Robert instantly began his carefully practiced act. He seized his wife, physically holding her back from entering the destroyed room. He proceeded down the hallway, briefly looking into Irene's ruined bedroom, then toward the boys' quarters at the distant end of the corridor. He firmly prevented Kathy from going farther, ordering her not to look inside the children's room and warning that what she would see was utterly unbearable. He portrayed himself as the guardian, the courageous barrier against the horror. Robert called emergency services. The recording of that emergency call remains an example of calculated deception. He ordered the dispatcher to send police immediately, his voice drenched in feigned hyperventilation and manufactured hysteria. He gave the Boundary Road address, loudly sobbing into the receiver, repeating that his wife's brother and his entire family had been murdered. He told the operator that blood was everywhere inside the house and throughout the rooms. He made certain his voice expressed utter shock, completely concealing the exhausted, burning muscles in his own shoulders. The lingering physical strain from swinging a heavy, blunt instrument dozens of times in pitch-black darkness. Within 10 minutes, the piercing wail of sirens sliced through the quiet suburban air. Numerous police cruisers, emergency medical units, and heavily armored forensic vans flooded Boundary Road, mounting curbs and creating a huge containment perimeter. Flashing blue and red lights illuminated the wealthy street, pulling horrified neighbors from their immaculate brick homes in winter coats. When veteran crime scene investigators entered the front door, even they stopped cold. The enormous quantity of blood covering the second floor made it almost impossible to cross the hallway without destroying possible forensic evidence. The crime's social reverberation was immediate, devastating, and utterly paralyzing across the shocked neighborhood and surrounding streets. North Epping was not accustomed to violent crime, much less the complete systematic destruction of an entire family unit. As the shocking magnitude of the massacre started spreading beyond the yellow police tape, widespread panic infected the community. Residents who had kept their doors unlocked for decades suddenly fitted heavy steel deadbolts and sophisticated alarm systems. Local hardware stores exhausted their security equipment within 48 hours. The terror was utterly suffocating, leaving ordinary residents deeply frightened, shaken, and profoundly unsettled. Unfounded theories quickly saturated the neighborhood network. The extreme savagery and overkill of the beating pointed toward a professional hit. Rumors spread quickly that the successful news agency was merely a front, that men owed massive unpayable debts to organized overseas triad syndicates, or that it was a carefully targeted, racially motivated hate crime intended to deliver a terrifying warning to the immigrant business community. The Rawson Street storefront was rapidly converted into a massive memorial, covered beneath thousands of floral bouquets and handwritten letters. Police faced a population that was utterly terrified, forcefully demanding immediate answers for an unimaginable level of violence. And at the very center of this swirling vortex of communal terror, seated heavily on the cold concrete curb outside the active crime scene, was Robert Z. He was surrounded by flashing cameras, sympathetic neighbors, and uniformed officers. He sobbed openly, hiding his face in his hands, flawlessly performing the role of the completely shattered survivor. The man who had physically destroyed an entire bloodline was now eagerly accepting condolences from the very community he had just violently traumatized. The New South Wales State Crime Command Homicide Squad inherited a scene of unmatched devastation. The physical evidence was severely compromised by the enormous quantity of biological material. Blood spatter covered ceilings, walls, and heavy oak furniture, forming a chaotic forensic puzzle that would require months to properly decipher. The initial working theory strongly and immediately favored organized crime. The horrific overkill, total neutralization of the entire household, and cutting of the main power grid pointed toward a highly trained syndicate. Detectives spent the first 6 months absorbed in this theory. They combed through the news agency's financial records, seeking concealed gambling debts, triad extortion efforts, or offshore money laundering schemes. They questioned hundreds of suppliers, ordinary customers, and distant associates, desperately seeking any possible conflict or grievance. Every lead dissolved into nothing. The victims were an entirely honest, hard-working family with no connections to the criminal underworld. Investigators then briefly pursued the possibility of a racially motivated hate crime, reflecting the intense panic gripping the local community. But that theory too collapsed quickly under rigorous scrutiny. There was no manifesto, no vandalism, no identifying signature left behind to deliver a political message. Detectives were confronting an impenetrable dead end. Frustration inside the precinct was plainly obvious to everyone involved. They needed to quit looking outward and turn sharply back toward the crime scene's physical structure itself. Analysts stripped away the visual disorder and concentrated solely on the attack's cold logistics. The perpetrator traversed a huge multi-level property in total pitch-black darkness. They did not stumble over furniture. They did not accidentally enter the vacant guest rooms. They traveled with chilling, practiced efficiency straight to the occupied bedrooms. Moreover, there was absolutely no evidence of forced entry. The heavy front door had opened smoothly using a key. A professional hitman sent by a syndicate would never risk an extended, chaotic physical struggle with a heavy weapon. They would have used a suppressed firearm for a clean, rapid extraction. The weapon used on Boundary Road was intensely personal, intimate, and deliberately chosen. It was a heavy, customized, blunt object, probably a hammer altered with a rope to keep it from slipping from blood-soaked hands. Using it demanded immense physical exertion, close proximity, and sustained blind rage. This was not a contract killing. It was a hands-on execution planned by someone firmly inside the family's inner circle. The investigative focus now aggressively shifted toward the surviving relatives. Robert Say had placed himself directly at the heart of the tragedy, serving as the chief spokesperson and sobbing guardian of his devastated wife. Yet experienced interrogators started detecting subtle micro-expressions. His sorrow seemed carefully practiced, almost performative. His account contained a huge unexplained gap between midnight and the discovery that morning. He insisted with confidence that he had slept throughout the night, But the psychological profile developed by behavioral specialists pointed toward something considerably darker. Investigators uncovered the deep, simmering bitterness rooted in his failed restaurant business and complete financial dependence upon his wife. The sharp divide between his inflated self-image as a former medical specialist and his present existence as an unemployed dependent supplied precisely the poisonous motive needed for an atrocity of this magnitude. To corner an intelligent, narcissistic suspect, police launched Strikeforce Norburn. They obtained secret warrants to thoroughly wire Robert's life. Listening equipment was planted inside his Beck Street residence and concealed within his vehicles. Detectives listened to his telephone conversations and followed his movements around the city. At the same time, to chart the suspect's movements through darkness, forensic imaging specialists employed sophisticated 3D scanning technology to construct an exact high-resolution digital replica of the house. This detailed rendering enabled analysts to follow the precise paths of the weapon strikes and the progression of the attack, conclusively establishing that the perpetrator had an almost surgical understanding of where each victim slept. The digital reconstruction utterly dismantled the random home invasion theory, and a chilling psychological cat and mouse game took shape. Detectives deliberately slipped Robert's scattered bits of information during informal interviews to measure his reactions. He repeatedly tried steering discussions toward the triad theories, even volunteering tactical suggestions so he could appear intellectually equal to investigators. Police permitted him to weave his false narrative, patiently assembling an impenetrable body of evidence while he remained oblivious that every self-assured smile and irritated sigh was quietly being recorded and cataloged. Although investigators possessed psychological certainty, authorities still required concrete, indisputable evidence. It eventually surfaced through microscopic examination of the devastated master suite. Within the enormous damage, forensic technicians discovered one partial footprint transferred onto the polished hardwood floor. It was officially designated Stain 91. The print was incomplete, yet its intricate rubber tread design was remarkably distinctive. Authorities worked closely with footwear manufacturing specialists and ultimately identified the precise make and model, the AS6 Galcurios running shoe. Its size was determined to fall exactly between a US 8.5 and 9.5. At last, the surveillance net had captured its target. While Robert was under active surveillance, detectives recorded him learning that police were asking questions about AS6 footwear. Concealed microphones picked up the frantic sounds of him destroying physical evidence. Investigators heard him violently tearing apart shoeboxes and forcefully flushing unidentified materials down his toilet. Moreover, forensic investigators carried out a search warrant at his residence and discovered microscopic blood traces belonging to the victims concealed within his garage drain. He had carefully scrubbed himself and his weapons after the killings, yet the sheer scale of the bloodshed rendered complete biological cleanup impossible. The detectives' deliberate patience had finally succeeded. Every false lead was discarded. The trap was now closed. The supposedly untouchable doctor's narcissistic disguise was utterly destroyed by one bloody footprint and his own fearful whispers secretly recorded in darkness. Justice moved forward at a painfully slow pace. On May 5, 2011, almost 2 years after the massacre, Robert C. was officially arrested. What came next became a punishing legal marathon involving 4 separate trials. The first collapsed because of legal technicalities. The second was disrupted after the presiding judge became ill. The third concluded with a hung jury. Defense lawyers repeatedly challenged the footprint evidence, desperately trying to revive the phantom triad syndicate theories. Yet the prosecution's case remained an unbreakable fortress. At the final trial, the Crown methodically tore apart Robert's kindly public image. Prosecutors introduced the secret audio recordings, the destroyed ASICS shoeboxes, and microscopic blood evidence recovered from his garage drain. They depicted a deeply narcissistic man pushed toward total destruction by nothing but raw, unchecked envy. In January 2017, the 4th jury finally reached its verdict. Robert was ultimately found guilty on all 5 counts presented before the court. 1 month later, he received 5 consecutive life sentences without any possibility of parole. The disgraced physician was permanently confined inside a concrete cell for the remainder of his life. A grim final fall for a man who had murdered his own bloodline to claim their throne. Production note for freelance editors. While creating the visual assets for this segment, use our standard 3D rendering approach for the courtroom sequences. Keep the color grading stark and high contrast, making certain it seamlessly matches the established True Crime Chronicles aesthetic. Eventually, the Boundary Road estate was sold, its grim history quietly erased by new owners. But for the Lynn family's sole survivor, the nightmare remains permanent. The eldest daughter had been away on a school trip when her parents, aunt, and younger brothers were brutally murdered. She returned to a world completely broken, never knowing that the uncle who gladly took her in was the very architect of her suffering. Robert Seed did not merely take her family away. He made her live alongside the very monster who destroyed them. When 9-year-old Felicia Williams vanished in Tampa, Florida, those entrusted with her care never contacted police. They made no effort to find her. Instead, they devoted hours to constructing an account of what had occurred.
A story
One
investigators
investigator
quickly
soon
realized
determined
wasn't
false.
true.
And fewer
In
than
less than
24 hours later, Felicia would be
found dead.
This is the story of Felicia Williams, a 9-year-old who vanished from a Florida apartment complex in May 2014. What initially looked like an urgent effort to find a missing child soon turned into a homicide investigation, exposing a heartbreaking betrayal by someone trusted to care for her. This is Felicia's story. To her family, she was Sugar Plum. Felicia Williams was 9 years old, sweet, outgoing, and bursting with personality. She wore a bright smile and had an infectious laugh. Born on December 9, 2004, she was the second youngest of 6 girls and her mother's namesake. Family members and friends remembered Felicia as a kind-hearted child who truly cared about other people. From an early age, she possessed a nurturing nature and often attempted to console others whenever they became upset. In 2014, Felicia lived with her family in Tampa, Florida. She attended Edison Elementary School, where she was regarded as friendly and respectful. Her teachers and classmates adored her, and whenever she moved through the school hallways, she was seldom seen without a smile. Away from school, Felicia loved many of the activities popular with girls her age. She was a devoted Hello Kitty fan and enjoyed being outside. One activity she especially loved was going to a nearby park to feed the ducks and birds that gathered beside the pond. She also treasured time with her family, who remained at the heart of her world. Felicia was also involved with her church community. She sang with the youth choir at Zion Temple Holiness Church, where her family worshiped. People who knew her there described her as cheerful, courteous, and enthusiastic about taking part. Though she was just 9 years old, Felicia had already started imagining what her future might hold. Her family said she often spoke about someday becoming either a teacher or a doctor. Both dreams mirrored the compassionate character so many people recognized in her. Like countless children her age, Felicia's daily life centered largely on her family, school, church, and the people she regularly spent time with. One of those people was a woman named Ebony Y. In 2014, Ebony was 23 years old and lived in the same East Tampa neighborhood as Felicia and her family. She worked at a nearby nursing home and had formed a close bond with Felicia's mother, Felicia Demerson. Over time, Ebony became a familiar figure in the family's everyday life. She often took Felicia and her siblings to church, lunch, nearby parks, and bike rides throughout the neighborhood. The children knew her well, and according to people familiar with the family, they liked spending time with her. Abby's connection to the family was so close that she called herself Felicia's godmother. To Felicia's mother, however, the term was more than a nickname. It represented the confidence she had put in Ebony after years of seeing her care for and spend time with her children. For years, this arrangement had been familiar to everyone around them, and nothing about Felicia spending time in Ebony's care seemed out of the ordinary at the time. By May 2014, then, it was not unusual for Felicia to spend the day with Ebony. She had done so many times before. On May 16, 2014, then, that trust appeared no different from any other day. Felicia had stayed home with her siblings while her mother was at a hair appointment. Around 4 p.m., Felicia phoned her mother and asked whether she could spend the afternoon with Ebony, who, one of Felicia's sisters later said, had arrived at their home and asked whether Felicia could spend time with her. Felicia's mother said Ebony told the family she intended to take Felicia to a Friday night church service, the park, or somewhere to get food. Those were familiar outings Ebony had taken the children on before. There was therefore nothing in the request that seemed troubling. Believing her daughter would be with someone she knew and trusted, Felicia Demerson allowed her to leave. At the time, Nothing about the arrangement suggested that this particular afternoon would be different from the many other occasions when Felicia had gone with Ebony. The family had no reason to expect anything unusual, and Felicia herself had no apparent reason to believe she was entering a situation unlike the ordinary outings she had experienced with Ebony before. That familiarity was important because it helped explain why her mother's permission came without hesitation or alarm, even though another person would be accompanying them, and Felicia had never previously met him. Her mother did not know someone else would join them. 3 days earlier, Ebony had encountered a man walking through her East Tampa neighborhood who called himself Trevor. His actual name was Granville Ritchie. Ebony said they swapped phone numbers and soon started spending time together. Their relationship developed rapidly. Within only a few days, Ebony had become intensely infatuated with Ritchie. She thought she was in love and started imagining a future alongside him. Yet Ebony did not realize that much of the personal information Ritchie had given her was false. He claimed to be single, but he was actually married. And, by his own statements to investigators, he was involved with several other women at that time. During the days before May 16th, Ebony often talked with Ritchie about events in her life, including her relationship with Felicia Williams and her family. She told him Felicia regularly spent time with her and described frustrations she had been experiencing concerning the 9-year-old. Earlier that day, May 16th, Ebony complained to Ritchie that Felicia was causing her stress. Later testimony indicated that Ritchie suggested they pick Felicia up together and spend time talking to her. To Ebony, the proposal may have appeared innocent, but it meant Felicia would be meeting Granville Ritchie for the very first time. Later that afternoon, Ritchie drove his silver Lexus into the East Tampa neighborhood to collect Ebony and Felicia. Initially, Ebony said she thought the three of them were only going to get something to eat. Once they entered the vehicle, however, Ritchie drove toward the Dural Oaks apartment complex in Temple Terrace, where his mother lived. Ebony said that when she questioned their destination, Ritchie explained that his mother was cooking and they could eat inside the apartment. But Ebony disliked the idea because Felicia had never met Ritchie's mother, and she felt it would be uncomfortable for the 9-year-old to eat food prepared by a stranger. Instead, they pulled into a Checker restaurant and purchased food for Felicia before proceeding to the apartment complex. She ate as they continued driving. To Felicia, the afternoon probably appeared completely ordinary. Yet by that point, it was developing in a way very different from what Felicia's mother believed was happening. After they reached the apartment, Ebony told Felicia to phone her mother. According to Ebony's later testimony, Felicia told her mother she was with Ebony, but never said they were inside Granville Ritchie's apartment or that Ritchie was there. From Felicia Demerson's point of view, therefore, the call seemed entirely normal. Before entering, though, Ebony said Ritchie showed her a bag filled with drugs. She also said she took a Molly, or ecstasy, similar to the drug she had taken when she and Ritchie first met only days before. Not long after going inside the apartment, Ebony said she started experiencing the drug's effects. Even then, she and Ritchie spent some of the afternoon discussing with Felicia concerns they had previously talked about. Ebony said they questioned the child about allegations that she had taken money and cell phones from relatives, along with problems involving her behavior at school. At some point during their visit, Ritchie told Ebony he wanted marijuana. Ebony testified that she called her grandfather to ask whether he could help her obtain some. Her grandfather told her to come to his house. What happened next would become one of the most significant and closely examined portions of Ebony's account because, according to her, she ultimately decided to leave Felicia alone with Granville Ritchie. At first, she said, she was reluctant to leave her, but Ritchie told her taking Felicia along would not be wise. Ione did not have a driver's license, and she would be riding with weed inside the car. So she said Ritchie persuaded her that bringing the child with her was a bad idea. As a result, she left Felicia with a man she had known for only several days. According to Ebony, she was away for approximately 40 to 50 minutes. During that period, she said she and Ritchie talked several times over the phone, including when she needed his assistance getting back through the apartment complex gate. Yet when Ebony returned, Felicia was no longer there. Ritchie, she said, told her that he had given Felicia money and permitted her to walk to a nearby CVS to purchase candy. According to Ritchie, the 9-year-old had gone out by herself and simply never returned. Concerned, Ebony drove over to the CVS and asked an employee whether a girl resembling Felicia had entered the store. The employee, she said, told her no. She went back to the apartment complex, and when she arrived, Ebony said Richie was standing outside the apartment. He was shirtless, sweating, and dressed in nothing but pants. According to her testimony, he seemed distressed that Felicia had failed to return. Ebony said she initially attempted to reassure him, explaining that Felicia sometimes wandered away and would probably return. But the longer the time passed, the more worried she became because there was still no sign of Felicia. Despite believing the child was missing, however, neither Ebony nor Richie contacted her family, called the police, or went searching for her. Instead, Ebony said she entered a bedroom closet to pray and settle herself as the effects of the drugs gradually began fading. When she emerged from the closet, she had a drink. Then, according to her, she and Richie had sex on the living room floor. More hours went by. Nobody called Felicia's mother. Nobody contacted police. Nobody searched for the little girl Richie claimed had merely wandered off. But Felicia had not simply become lost. Before the night ended, Granville Richie would start taking measures to ensure that nobody would ever find her. On May 16, 2014, 9-year-old Felicia Williams had gone with a family friend for what was supposed to be an ordinary day out. Yet several hours later, Felicia would be missing. For someone who called herself Felicia's godmother, Ebony Y displayed strikingly little urgency during the hours following her disappearance. There was no frantic effort to find her, no immediate police call, and for hours Felicia's family did not even know that anything was wrong. Instead, Ebony and Granville Richie had started planning what they would tell others about what happened that afternoon. Before Richie drove Ebony home, therefore, the pair settled on a story. According to Ebony, Richie demanded that they make no reference to a man being with her and Felicia that day. Instead, he told her to mention a woman named Vivian, whom Ebony understood to be Richie's mother, even though she had never met the woman. Once they had agreed upon their version, the two went their separate ways. Ebony called her sister and made plans to meet her at a liquor store on 22nd Street. When they met, Ebony told her sister the story she and Richie had decided to use. Only afterward did she call Felicia's mother. By then, several hours had gone by since Felicia supposedly walked away from the apartment. Felicia's mother instructed Ebony to meet her at a nearby Burger King. Before heading there, however, Ebony called a friend and asked him to collect her and her sister. They made another stop as well, not to look for Felicia, but to purchase additional ecstasy. Ebony would later say she wanted to get high once more. When Felicia Demerson finally got Ebony's call, she was unsure what to make of it. The account Ebony gave her did not add up because, according to Ebony, she had taken Felicia to a Temple Terrace apartment where her boyfriend's mother lived. She claimed that while she was showering, Felicia had somehow disappeared. To Felicia's mother, that explanation created even more questions. Darkness had already fallen. Her 9-year-old daughter was missing, and the person she had trusted with her safety could not tell her where she was. Until that point, Felicia's mother had thought her daughter was merely spending the afternoon with a trusted family friend. Now she discovered that Felicia had been brought to an unfamiliar apartment and had supposedly disappeared while under Ebony's care. Realizing that something was seriously wrong, Felicia's mother did not hesitate. She immediately contacted the Temple Terrace Police Department and reported her daughter missing. After the missing person report was submitted, Ebony met officers near the apartment complex and repeated the same account she had given Felicia's family. She continued presenting the story that she and Richie had agreed upon earlier that evening. As the search for Felicia continued into the night, her family waited for information and prayed that she would be located safely. Instead, morning came without any sign of Felicia. Ebony said she went to work the following day but stayed only a short while before becoming overwhelmed. Instead,
morning arrived with no sign of Felicia.
Once home, she spent much of the day communicating with Richie's mother, who by then knew the version of events that had been presented to Felicia's family and investigators. Meanwhile, Ebony continued attempting to contact Richie himself. After several failed attempts, she eventually managed to reach him. By then, however, Ebony said she had started questioning whether Felicia's disappearance involved more than she had been told. When she finally spoke with Richie, she directly asked whether he had done something to Felicia. According to her, he denied it. From the outset, though, investigators were troubled by Ebony's explanation of what had happened to Felicia. The timeline remained unclear, important details were absent, and the account of how a 9-year-old girl could seemingly disappear raised more questions than answers. As a result, on May 17th, the day following Felicia's disappearance, detectives asked Ebony to return for a formal interview. During that questioning, investigators disputed several elements of her account and demanded further information concerning the hours before Felicia disappeared.
Back in for a more formal interview.
Exactly where
And during
Felicia
that
had
interview,
been,
investigators challenged several
and
aspects
what
of
had
her
occurred
story and
before she
pressed her
vanished.
for additional
Those
details about the
unanswered
hours
questions made
leading up to
Ebony's
Felicia's
changing
disappearance
explanations
continued.
increasingly
Ebony began
important
to
the
change
investigation
parts of her
and
account.
placed greater
She
scrutiny on
admitted that
every
the story
detail
she had initially provided
The
was not entirely
inconsistencies also
truthful.
made it harder for
According to her,
investigators to
she had not
accept her account. Ebony started revising portions of her story. She acknowledged that the account she had first given them had not been completely honest. She said she had
Ebony
not been
explained
inside
that
an
while she and
apartment
Trevor
with
were
Vivian
having
when
sex in the
Felicia vanished.
bathroom.
Instead, she told detectives she had been there with a man she knew as Trevor. Ebony said that while she and Trevor were having sex in the bathroom, Felicia remained in the living room watching cartoons. Under this revised account, Felicia was missing when the two emerged from the bathroom. For detectives, this altered explanation resolved certain questions while raising numerous others. It did not take investigators long to determine the identity of the man Ebony had called Trevor. While Ebony was still being questioned, detectives instructed her to phone him. During that conversation, she told him she had revised her account and had informed investigators that he was with her when Felicia disappeared. By then, however, investigators were already trying to establish his identity independently. Drawing on evidence collected during the investigation, including telephone records and information tied to the apartment where Ebony said they had been, detectives linked the name Trevor to Granville Ritchie. After identifying him, investigators began examining his history. What they uncovered was disturbing. Ritchie was far more than a man Ebony had encountered only days before. His criminal record extended back years and contained convictions involving violent offenses. As detectives discovered more about Ritchie, their attention increasingly focused on the man who
Given
had been with
investigators
Felicia
had completely
Williams during the
unraveled.
last hours
The
she
story
was known
involving
to be
Ritchie's
alive.
mother was gone.
By
The
this
account she
stage,
gave during her
Ebony's
second
original
interview
account to
raised even
investigators
more
had fallen
concerns,
apart
and
entirely.
detectives
The
had
explanation
already
involving
uncovered
Ritchie's
evidence
mother
that
had
contradicted
disappeared.
key parts of
Her
what she had
second
been telling
interview
them.
version
Now,
created
after getting that
additional
second
suspicion.
version of events,
While detectives had already found evidence conflicting with important portions of what she had told them. After giving that revised account, Ebony Y was arrested and charged with lying to investigators. Ebony understood that detectives no longer accepted her story. As investigators continued demanding answers, she altered her account once again. Yet before Y could provide that new version, the investigation took a devastating turn. On May 17th, that afternoon, while detectives continued trying to establish what had happened to Felicia, a couple fishing along the shoreline near the Courtney Campbell Causeway made a terrible discovery. At about 3:20 p.m., they noticed a small body floating among rocks and mangroves, and the body was later identified as Felicia Williams. In less than 24 hours since she was last seen alive, the effort to locate the missing child had turned into a homicide investigation. The discovery changed the direction of the case immediately. What had begun as a search for a child whose whereabouts were unknown was now a criminal investigation into her death. Investigators had to establish where Felicia had been taken, who had been with her, and what happened after she was left alone. The body gave detectives a location and physical evidence that could be compared with what they had already learned about the apartment, the vehicle, and Ritchie's movements that night. Once investigators learned Felicia had been found, they went back to Ebony and told her that Felicia was dead. The nature of the conversation immediately changed because there was no longer any chance that Felicia had simply wandered off or might eventually return home. Detectives now needed a precise account of what had taken place inside that apartment. According to Ebony, this was when she finally chose to tell investigators the truth. She acknowledged that she had lied about what happened on May 16th. She told detectives she had left Felicia by herself in the apartment with the man she knew as Trevor. She also confessed that the stories she had previously told police were made up. Ebony said she and Trevor had talked about what they would tell people well before anyone contacted Felicia's mother, including the story about Felicia wandering away. The details concerning Ritchie's mother, along with other portions of her earlier accounts, had all been invented after Felicia disappeared. Ebony admitted that when anyone finally learned Felicia was missing, she and Ritchie had already settled on the story they would tell. To investigators, that admission supported what they had suspected from the start. Ebony Y had not merely kept information
Like
from
Ebony's
her.
previous statements,
She
his
had
account
deliberately
differed
helped
from
conceal
what
what
investigators
happened
had
during the
already been
final
told.
hours of Felicia's
Richie
life.
denied
Following
that Felicia
Ebony Y's
disappeared
arrest
while
and the
Ebony was
recovery
taking
of
a shower.
Felicia's body,
He also denied portions of the
investigators
story
moved quickly to
involving
find
drugs, the
Granville
trip to
Ritchie.
CVS, and
They had been
claims that
monitoring
he had
his
been left
whereabouts for
alone
days
with the
and
9-year-old.
discovered that soon after
Instead,
the murder,
Richie told
he had
detectives that
traveled to
Felicia
St.
vanished
Petersburg,
while
Florida.
he and Ebony
Once
were
they
having
located
sex in a
him,
back bedroom.
U.S. Marshals
According to
arrested
Richie,
him on unrelated charges and returned him to Tampa, where detectives questioned him. What Richie told detectives was another version of what had occurred. Much like Ebony's earlier accounts, his explanation conflicted with information
described the rest of his
investigators had already
evening,
received.
telling investigators
Richie
that
denied
he
that
left the
Felicia
area and
disappeared
drove
while
to
Ebony
visit a
was
friend.
showering.
According
also
to Richie, the
rejected
friend wasn't
portions
home, and so
concerning
he later
drugs,
returned
the
to the
trip to
apartment
CVS,
complex and
and
remained
the
there
allegation
for a
that he
period
had
of
been
time
left
before
alone with
eventually
the
leaving
9-year-old.
again.
Instead,
Richie told detectives
Richie
that
said Felicia
around midnight
vanished while
he drove
and
to
Ebony
St.
were having
Petersburg,
sex in a
where he
back
spent the
bedroom.
night with his girlfriend.
According to him, they had been occupied for about 45 minutes, and when they came out, Felicia was gone. Richie claimed Y briefly looked for the child before he drove her home. He then explained what happened afterward, telling investigators he left the area and drove to see a friend. Richie said the friend was not home, so he eventually returned to the apartment complex and stayed there for some time before leaving again. He told detectives that around midnight he drove to St. Petersburg, where he spent the night with his girlfriend. By then, however, investigators were no longer concentrating only on the discrepancies between Richie's story and Ebony's. Their focus was on determining what had happened to Felicia during the hours before her body was discovered, and the evidence they were finding was starting to point toward a very different account. After interviewing Richie, investigators secured a search warrant for the apartment where Felicia had last been seen alive. What they discovered created a disturbing picture. Inside the residence, detectives found evidence indicating that Felicia's body had been hidden and removed after her death. Investigators located marks across the carpet that appeared to have been left by a wheeled object dragged over the apartment floor. The marks continued toward the rear patio. Near that patio, detectives recovered a broken suitcase wheel. Inside the apartment, they also discovered a broken zipper pull. As the investigation progressed, both pieces were connected to a Protea brand suitcase. The finding became even more important when investigators searched the silver Lexus Richie had been driving. Inside the vehicle, they discovered the Protege suitcase. Detectives later learned witnesses had seen Richie with 2 suitcases of the same style, though they were different sizes, before Felicia disappeared. Investigators also found indications that the apartment had been cleaned sometime after Felicia was last seen. Meanwhile, a review of Richie's cell phone records uncovered something else. Cell-side data indicated that he had traveled to the area where Felicia's body was eventually recovered. Not only had he gone there, records showed that he remained in the area for an extended period. Evidence recovered from Richie's Lexus further increased investigators' suspicions because detectives found plant material lodged in one of the vehicle's headlights that matched vegetation growing around the location where Felicia's body was discovered. They also found soil on the driver's side floorboard that was consistent with soil from that same area. Considered separately, each piece of evidence raised questions. Taken together, however, investigators believed the evidence was helping them reconstruct what occurred after Felicia was killed. Based on the physical evidence, surveillance footage, cell phone data, and condition of the apartment, investigators formed a theory about what happened after Ebony Y left Felicia alone with Granville Ritchie. Detectives believed Felicia was killed inside the apartment sometime after Ebony departed. Investigators said Ritchie then hid the child's body inside the apartment while continuing with the events of that evening. After dropping Ebony off, detectives believed Ritchie returned to the apartment and began trying to dispose of the evidence. Investigators concluded that at some point he put Felicia's body inside a rolling suitcase. Evidence from the apartment suggested that the suitcase was dragged through the residence and toward the rear patio before eventually being loaded into the vehicle Ritchie had been driving. From there, investigators relied on cell phone records and traffic camera footage to follow Ritchie's movements. The evidence indicated that late that night, he left the apartment complex and drove across Hillsborough County toward the Courtney Campbell Causeway. After crossing the bridge's main span, investigators determined Ritchie turned onto a secluded access road running beside the causeway. According to the state's theory, he drove several miles along the road until reaching an area covered by dense vegetation and largely concealed from passing traffic. Investigators believed that Richie removed the suitcase from the vehicle and disposed of Felicia's body in the waters of Old Tampa Bay. Afterward, evidence showed Richie continued to St. Petersburg, where he spent the night with another girlfriend. Investigators also concluded that sometime after disposing of Felicia's body, Richie discarded the suitcase used to transport her and threw away the clothing she had been wearing. By the following afternoon, when Felicia's body was discovered, many physical items that might have directly connected her to the apartment were already gone. Despite those efforts, however, investigators believed the evidence told a clear story. Felicia Williams had not wandered away from the apartment. She had never left alive. Although investigators believed they understood what had happened to Felicia, constructing a case that could withstand proof in court would take time. Over the weeks that followed, detectives continued collecting evidence while awaiting forensic testing results from several crime laboratories. As that evidence was processed and examined, investigators worked to reinforce the case against Granville Ritchie and corroborate the timeline they had developed. Then, on August 15, 2014, almost 3 months following Felicia's murder, the investigation reached a crucial turning point. By then, Ritchie was already being held at the Hillsborough County Jail on unrelated charges. However, after examining evidence collected throughout the investigation, authorities officially arrested him for Felicia's death. A grand jury subsequently indicted Ritchie for first-degree murder, capital sexual battery, and aggravated child abuse. For Felicia's family, the indictment marked a significant move toward justice. Yet an arrest was merely the beginning. Before the case could go before a jury, prosecutors needed to establish precisely what had happened to 9-year-old Felicia Williams inside that apartment on May 16, 2014. And what investigators would uncover was horrifying. More than 5 years after Felicia's murder, Granville Ritchie finally went on trial in September 2019. Throughout the trial, prosecutors introduced forensic findings, cell phone records, and witness testimony that they argued charted Ritchie's movements on the night Felicia was killed. One of the most important pieces of evidence was cell tower data tracking Ritchie's route from the apartment to the Courtney Campbell Causeway, where Felicia was eventually discovered. Prosecutors also introduced forensic evidence taken from Ritchie's vehicle that they said tied him to the area where her body was recovered. Ebony Y took the stand as well, recounting the events before Felicia disappeared and explaining how she came to leave the 9-year-old alone with Ritchie. The defense attacked Ebony's credibility, highlighting the different accounts she had given investigators during the early portion of the investigation. Defense lawyers also challenged elements of the medical evidence concerning Felicia's death. But after listening to weeks of testimony, jurors were ultimately not persuaded by the defense's claims. On September 25, 2019, following approximately 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Granville Ritchie guilty on every count. 2 days afterward, those same jurors unanimously recommended a death sentence. In September 2020, Hillsborough County Circuit Judge Michelle Sisko formally handed down that punishment. During the hearing, Felicia's mother spoke to the court about the devastating loss of her daughter and the effect her murder had on their family. More than 6 years after Felicia left home, expecting to spend an afternoon with someone she trusted, the man responsible for killing her received a death sentence. Although Granville Ritchie had been convicted and sentenced to death, the legal proceedings against Ebony Y had still not concluded. Investigators never alleged that Ebony Y took part in Felicia's murder. Authorities did maintain, however, that her repeated falsehoods during the investigation's early stages had obstructed efforts to establish what had happened to the child. In October 2020, Ebony Y entered an open guilty plea to providing false information to law enforcement during an investigation involving a child. The offense was a third-degree felony under Florida law and carried a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison. When Ebony appeared for sentencing on December 18, 2020, Hillsborough Circuit Judge Samantha Ward recognized both the seriousness of the offense and Ebony's eventual cooperation with investigators. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Ebony to 75 days in county jail. For many observers, that punishment became a subject of debate. Some believed Ritchie had manipulated Ebony and that she ultimately assisted investigators in building their case against him. Others questioned how a woman who called herself Felicia's godmother could leave a 9-year-old alone with a man she had known for only days, then spend hours helping him hide the truth about what happened afterward. Those questions have remained long after the case ended, but one fact remains undisputed. On May 16, 2014, a little girl loved by her family, friends, and community lost her life at the hands of a man she should never have been left alone with. Felicia Williams was only 9 years old. She should have been able to grow up, complete elementary school, sing in her church choir, spend time with her family, and keep dreaming about the future she was only beginning to picture for herself. Instead, her life was taken by someone who should never have had access to her to begin with. For Felicia's family, the grief of losing her was made even more painful by the fact that she had been entrusted to someone they trusted, someone who called herself Felicia's godmother, someone they believed would keep her safe. That trust was shattered in the worst way imaginable. Today, Felicia is remembered as Sugar Plum, a sweet little girl with a radiant smile, a love of Hello Kitty, and a gentle heart that touched those around her. Her family remembers her with love, as do the classmates who grew up beside her and the community that grieved her death. More than a decade later, when Felicia's story is told, people are not remembering only the heartbreaking details of her final moments. They are remembering a little girl who should have made it home. May Felicia Williams rest in peace. Thanks for watching Crime Chapter 51. If you enjoyed today's cases, let us know in the comments which one stayed with you the most, and tell us where you're watching from. If you love long-form true crime documentaries, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next case.